Hello.
Shit, that would help. Well, welcome to this Q&A. I guess to start off, I don't know why I'm going to accurately sound. We can do in-person filmmakers can introduce themselves, and then Zoom filmmakers can unmute and introduce themselves and just what each of your projects were. And then we can do the question too, and then open up to audience. So we'll start off.
Hi, my name is Liz Roberts. Mine was Even God, the VHS with the previous footage licensing contract in the second half.
I'm Walt, and my video was a video about red balloons.
I'm Emily, and I co-directed the first one, bliss.jpg.
Cool. And then maybe from that we can go to Elijah, who's the other.
Hi, I'm Elijah Stevens, the other co-director of bliss.jpg.
And then whoever wants to go next.
Yep. Hi, I'm Zalika Shoja, and I was the director of Demarcations.
Hi, I'm Libertad Gills, and I'm the director of 1922, the film from Ecuador.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for being with us in person and virtual. The concept of the concept of the poor image is a really central part of the thematics of this program. So I guess to start off as a baseline question to everyone, I'd be curious what everyone feels about their practice in relationship to the idea of the poor image, if that's a term you embrace, if that's a term you push against. Do we need new language to discuss the kind of image making that is uniting this body of work that's making us consider both the many ways that images are functioning? If anyone would like to jump in, maybe we can start with Zoom and then we'll go to in person. If not, we can jump with in person if people have in person responses.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the idea of a poor image seems like it means like something different for everyone, obviously. But for me, I think it's something that's accessible and sort of embracing the poor image is something that brings filmmaking to a level where it's like I don't have to spend money to do something, and I can find the beauty in the imperfections of a scanned VHS tape or the pixels of an image zoomed in or whatever. And I think that's just like very much a part of our world today. And so for me, it makes me like not afraid of making movies just because I don't have the money to do it.
Really valid, incredible point.
Well, I hadn't heard that phrase before watching, was it from 1922? So it's new to me thinking about it through that lens. But I think the way that Elijah and I were thinking about images when we started making our film were like these images of nature that we're familiar with, not because we've seen them inside of nature, but because we've seen them as these sort of trademarked images on computer desktops. And there were a lot of reasons why we were thinking about that, mostly related to kind of the processes of resource extraction, but also relating to what you were saying, Walt. We also didn't have any money to make so like the kind of the recycling of images and sound, which is kind of how we approached it, was sort of a theoretical framework, but also was just like coming from a place of how to make a landscape film and generate landscape images when we don't have any money to go anywhere and shoot or record. Yeah, well, I mean, I guess I literally made something about like documentary industry capitalism. So, but I think about the poor image and this kind of navigating personal work through an industry space and all the politics and ethics of that. But I do think that in some ways for me, that essay in defense of the poor image has been somewhat like utilized in academic circles to reinforce a class system of images that it was originally trying to work against. And so that's my kind of question about that.
And that's a really valid question. I hope a lot of people will unpack and consider. Does anyone on Zoom have any remarks or they would like to add into this conversation?
Yeah, my film was in part inspired by Ito Styles' essay, as is mentioned in the film. But I think it is really interesting to think about whether or not we can use other words or other names for these types of images. And I think the essay really provokes for that to even be possible, for those questions to exist. But I can see, at least in the film I made, and I think in many other films in the program, like there's the blur, like this image that's often out of focus or just not in the high HD, 4K, 2K quality. Maybe home movies or amateur films or films shot on cell phones, films sent across the platforms or shot on different, like shot off the screen in my case as well. So I think that these images can provide, or we can talk about it, but to what degree they can provide certain spaces of resistance within the image, resistance in the grain, in the blur, in maybe the opacity of the image and how it sort of resists being seen completely, and therefore opens questions to like how much can we really know from an image, how much can an image really say about something, and the fact that we need more images or plural, images in plural to really think about a subject.
I think that's a really great point, and it kind of leads to a second question that's open to everyone: is the way that the images are functioning, all these works, is really calling us attention to both the surface, but then also a second image, a second layer, going to notions of opacity, something that can't be seen, can't be. Where's the pixelization? Where's the blur? Whether it's working with found materials, all these practices are pushing us beyond just what's on the screen to something deeper. In a second way, I would say there's this constant thread. I kept thinking a lot about the notion of like secrets and confessions that were coming up, especially with the notion of opacity, and the fact that like when we think of a confession, it's not necessarily something that's polished and clean, but it's more just raw and immediate, and how each of these films are sort of in very direct and indirect ways sort of having this sort of second layer come out through this aesthetic use of what you call the pull image, or you call it the blur image, whatever you want to call it, but like this way of making is opening up new spaces, as was just brought up. And I'll be curious to hear about how those thematics of secrets, confessions, grief, acceptance is functioning in the practice on an emotional level, but also aesthetic level.
I think for Emily and I, one thing that was really fun to explore in making bliss.jpg was getting to really sort of push in as far as we could into these images that we usually only see on our desktop. They're really not meant to be actually even transformed into files that you're meant to manipulate. And so to push in to find the pixelation, but then also to shoot it on 16 millimeter to find the grain and to find those textures in the image, because there really are images that are not meant to be interrogated, and you're not supposed to question sort of both the kind of feeling of nature that they're meant to evoke and what sort of goes into the production and reproduction of those images. And I think that was just fun to explore those layers and that imagery.
Thank you. Zalika, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah. I was grieving a lot while making this piece. I was supposed to shoot a film in Afghanistan in the summer of 2021. And this work came from having to give up control over trying to produce like a film that I knew I wouldn't even have a good relationship with if it was going by the script and everything was really strict. So relying on, partially it was relying on the algorithm and just uploads from like family WhatsApp groups and just throughout social media. Looking at different ways that my people were responding to the withdrawal and also grieving. A lot of the images and the videos that they were uploading already felt like they had interrogated or reconfigured or recontextualized it. So I felt like I was working with their grief already and grieving and trying to break down some of those layers. It felt like all of the clips were they were meant to, for me, it felt like they were meant to be zoomed in and used in the way that they were uploaded to. A lot of them, I think, were like ripped videos and then just kept losing quality and degrading. And for me, that was really beautiful because I kept thinking about the idea of like a failed image or thinking about failure in the sense of grieving and not being able to have this kind of release and elongated grief, which is something very ritualized and been happening for a long time amongst my people and really important to our culture. So that's what all of the found footage meant to me.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Anyone in person or?
I guess I could add to what Elijah was saying about like the kind of zooming in, and I guess the title Phantom Mining just resonates a lot because when I was watching it, and I'd never actually seen it on the big screen before, we were sort of playing with the landscape film tradition, travelogues, or kind of filming even from like outside a car window or tourists, or kind of this kind of colonial project of looking at landscapes and kind of evoking the history of extraction from the land or from people, of labor, of resources, precious metals, things like that. And I guess when I was watching it this time, I was thinking about how almost sinister it looked to be like probing or like mining this landscape for more information, more like pixels or data. Just like, I guess to sort of, I don't know, like a kind of coveting of, or seeing nature only through a kind of speculation of what profit or what resources it could bring. So that was like a layer that I was thinking about.
I think something that was secondary to mine was sort of this grief for memories in like a digital age, where they are very accessible, but also very degraded, and we sort of shape our memories now around what we can store in our like photo app and all of that. And so like sort of grieving, and that's why I use the like AI child voice, because it's sort of this like imprinting myself digitally on these like memories and trying to like find a place where it like truly exists for me, and like creating like my false self to be in the back. And I think it also comes from just like being afraid of how digital everything is, and losing tangibility, and
I mean, I do love that essay in defense of the poor image from Hito's child, but I do think that in some ways the phrase poor image has kind of calcified, and I think there's different phrases that describe like the impulse in it. I think like Zalika just said the failed image, and I think last night we were talking about like necessary images. I'm not sure where that came from. Yeah, but I think like the like spiritual essence of it is there, but like the phrase has kind of gotten co-opted or something.
this might be a good time to open up to questions. Do we have questions from the audience? And Toma has a mic. Oh.
So with the images being so raw, not having a level of composition to kind of bury thought and feeling beneath to blur and make it more commercial, there's a sense of wanting to reclaim and hold, but also share memories. And it's very, for me, watching all of these made me feel very vulnerable and emotional as well. So I just wonder, as filmmakers, going through the process of going through these archival images, these past experiences, and recontextualizing them for an audience in a way that is still so vulnerable, if that changed your relationship with the images, with the audience, as a viewer yourself, and if you can kind of just speak to perhaps the way that making these films, just kind of metamorphosized your relationship with the images from when you first started.
Great question. Zoom folks, do you want to start? In-person folks? Does anyone feel cold?
I mean, I could. No, thank you. Thank you so much for that question. And it's important to think about like the vulnerability in terms of making these films and also watching them. I tend to feel that way anytime I'm making a film. I mean, I think that making a film is a process that exposes the filmmaker, like in any, no matter what the film is about, in a sense. But in my experience, making this film and working through, in this case, a massacre that occurred 100 years ago in Ecuador, it was also, it's maybe important to say the film was made, I started the film in 2020. So it was also in the middle of the pandemic when it was really hitting Ecuador very, very hard. And it was a difficult time. So there's also that level of vulnerability and grief that was happening like while I was making it. And so the film became a way that I could somehow respond to that feeling of powerlessness that was like all around me. So I think that, and I do believe that reappropriation and being able to work with materials that you can access online or through the channels that you have, available to you, I think can be a very empowering process and a way of being able to at least work with and think through things that are happening around you or things that have happened in the past, and put that in a creative, have a creative outlet, to be able to think about these things and work through them.
Thank you. Anyone else on Zoom want to chime in? In-person filmmakers? A response to that question?
I think this piece for me was interesting because I just sort of approached it. My mom had given me a tape of my grandpa's like retirement party, and I didn't realize that I actually like showed up at the end of the video. So I think in that way it was interesting to like strictly be the audience, and then all of a sudden I like became very personally attached to the video, and it was emotional. And so yeah, I don't know if that's exactly what you're asking, but and so anyways, this video it started to become this like relationship with my grandpa that I never had, and then it's kind of transformed into something that I've like shared with my family as a way to express myself and open up a little bit, and has led to like conversations about queerness and stuff with my family. So it's very personal. And so I think the vulnerability aspect of it was like kind of easily accessed because I really truly was like the only audience making it. And I actually didn't really think it would ever get into like festivals and stuff. So it's cool that it's here and I'm sharing it. But yeah, but yeah.
Alex, I say question. Oh yeah, because of the audience.
So it's not a question. It's a. I'm sorry. It's not an answer. It's a question that sort of starts to continue some of the cool ideas that you guys are working with about not using poor image and good image. So the first thing I want to say is that, like, I think that one of the problems is that we want to binarize it. So we want to have an opposition between two things. But certainly one of the oppositions that came to my mind learning from the pieces was ubiquitous images and what it would mean to make something singular, but or specific or personal in relationship to the ubiquitous images. I think you were talking about as well, like how do you make things precious as opposed to, but not in the monetary sense. But I think that the problem with that binary, ubiquitous, singular, good, bad, poor, nice, whatever it is that we would want to imagine words that open out from binaries. And I think that, this is where we might enter the space of affect, allegiance, community. There's other words that we can use that don't just necessarily throw us into these, find a binary, unmake it, find a new one. And I wonder if there's words that are just open-ended, that are multiple, that are not quantifiable, because this is where your piece lives. Is so important. It's like, well, yeah, you can quantify it for capital and then you're done. So what are rubrics that you guys are investigating that aren't locked in these binaries?
Do you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, like I mean, I love that. I would have to think about it. I think my rubric for this work was something about like intimacy and vulnerability, like historical records of queerness, and permission, consent. How long does that last? How often do you revisit that consent from people who are in your images? And wow, I don't know. That's a really lovely thought to make a rubric for it instead of like a binary. So I'll continue to think on that, but I'll pass it along here.
And I guess that point, each of these works in a different way, even with digital landscapes, is navigating this, like, was not only the long-term consent of the participants of the images, but all long-term relationships to it. And there's a very active relation that's occurring in all these pieces to that dynamic.
Yeah, I think just briefly to speak to this idea of troubling that binary between, a poor image and the rich image, or these other binaries that are set up. I think one thing that was really fun for us to play with was the way that sound could create new dynamics to that image. And obviously, like, the sound to our film is a core piece to creating new meaning and new context, new significance to that imagery. And I think it was just really fun to watch all of these films and see the way that there's a lot of textural sound, a really rich, playful sound that modulates or changes how we're perceiving so-called poor images.
Also important to note, one of the sounds is actually from Rebecca's film, No More Room in Hell, which is in the next blog, but which is a really lovely synchronicity to have the sound appear here and then there. Just real important to acknowledge. Do we have any more questions? Oh, we have one more, and I think we'll cut after that.
Hi. Thank you all for your work. Mine is less of a question, more of a comment, also following up on Alex's comment just not too long ago. And Liz also mentioned this notion of like based on Steyerl's essay on the poor image and the calcification of the word, but also potentially, while we're obviously reflecting on the potentials of that, say, the power of an essay, say like that one, while simultaneously realizing that the word calcification in the way that you used it, I think that could also be like empowering in the sense of like how we treat this notion of the poor, the good, the calcified, the petrified, and what does it mean to petrify an image, especially when we're dealing with images, say for example in this case, in the screen that we witnessed today. So for example, bliss, we saw images that are mundanity in such a way that, but then nonetheless made calcified, made totem in a way. And then you have also like images. I mean, I'm going to use two particular examples just out of like this moment. 1922, where these are images that are mirror images because it's archives that have been absolutely obliterated by power. So this notion of power and how we use words as poor or, you know, rich, you know, like in the same way that we might be potentially readmitting or repowering the word third world. You know, yes, it's a portal, it's a third world, it's outside of the binary, and therefore also the poor as a portal outside of the dynamics that consistently add to this notion of technology and power that are already innate to the technologies that we use when we make this type of work as cinema, right? So I think that one of the beauties about this program that I think is also a conversation that was very much present when we were like programming it was for this very particular subject. And again, it's not really a question, maybe a provocation, maybe something to keep lingering on, because this is not something that can have an immediate answer. But yeah, if anyone has a response, I would love to hear it, but I leave it there.
If there are any responses, hop in. If not, that might be a great note to close on too. Oh, Liberta?
No, yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, I mean, just the gesture of this image. I don't know if you can all remember 1922, but this image of like the screen expanding, like coming out of, so I start with the image like in a small format, and it starts coming closer and closer to the viewer. This image is completely difficult to see, and I think I do wonder how it was seen in that theater. I wish I could have been there with you all to see these films and to experience them all together. But this moment of, and I think in many of the films, to be able to see these films like in this material in this way, like in a movie theater, I think really describes maybe that contradiction, and like the way that binary can also be questioned, but in a very, very real sense. So these images being shown over there with an audience already says a lot, I think, about what these images can do if they are given, as Mimesis has given them, a space to be seen. So I really do thank the festival for showing these films that are not seen in all the festivals.
And with that, I think that's a perfect closing note. Thank you to our filmmakers, both in person and virtually. All these films are nominated for Audience Awards. Several of them are nominated for Jury Awards. Stick around for the 4 o'clock screening. Thank you.
Thanks, Devin.
Thank you.